I'm Steve Kantner, and this is the Tom Rowland podcast.
Steve, what's going on, man? How are you?
Man, I'm swell. Everything's just ducky.
That's awesome. I'm really glad to have you on the podcast. I don't think that we've ever met in person, but I've followed your career because I think we got started maybe around the same time. When did you get started with your land captain business?
God, I'm going to say it must have been, this is easily like 30 years ago that I had my first cards printed.
Yeah. I remember
You
you
know, I used to write for the magazines and stuff, and I got to see a lot of things. I still, and we have some stuff here in Fort Lauderdale that nobody did. Well, we had the introduction of exotic fish here, which we could have lived without. And also, we had one exotic that was deliberately stocked. It was the Amur, or Chinese grass carp, which was designed to eat the hydrilla, the aquatic weed, out of some of these canals, for water escapement, in a time of a hurricane. And it's a long story about how I first recognized these things. But basically, I was sitting under a ficus tree out here in Davie, Florida, swatting the fire ants off me. And all of a sudden, a wind gust came, and all these 30-pound, 20-pound fish were boiling in front of me. And what? And I looked for a second, and I saw the ficus tree we have run right out in front of the tennis club. These berries were falling. They do it normally, they're about 2 times a year, and hitting the water. And these big honkers, I mean, big, 20 to 40-pound fish, were gulping them off the surface. And man, I went home. I just grabbed a berry, got in the car. I quit while I was a winner. I went home, and the best thing I could do back then, I tied a lot of trout flies, and I tied them commercially. So I had all kinds of braided hair and everything else. But I started tying pink deer hair balls. I called them Kantner berries. And I went out there. I had a pocket full of them, and I went out there. I just took off of whatever I was doing that week. And I think I caught I'm not patting myself on the back, but I caught and released about 40 of these.
Wow.
In a week. And I mean, you could have knocked me over with a ficus berry. I mean, I was digging it.
That's so cool.
And,
That's
how it started.
Grass carp is a very hard fish to catch, I think. And on the rest of the year when they're not eating those berries, would you have success with them? How would you catch them?
I have on occasion. If you find where they stay in a sort of a measured length of canal, and if you know where exactly they are. Now, one of our prevalent trees down here is, the laurel oak. And when the acorns fall off, when they're first fresh, they go down deep and you don't see anything, but you could take an acorn with a split shot. Well, actually an acorn, and let it go down like in a spinning rod and get down in that dirty water about 5 feet. All of a sudden, boing.
Really? That's what they're doing there.
Yeah, but I never spoke much about that because that would kind of open it up a lot. Let me say that regrettably, a lot of people who catch fish, it's, they got to take one home to show them, even though these fish are, I mean, I'd eat my shoe before I'd eat one.
Yeah. Well, so we're just getting started talking. Some people probably definitely know who you are and other people might not. So you made your career in South Florida fishing as a fishing guide out of a vehicle, no boat. Called yourself the land.
That is correct. There are times that I've had canoes and I have used them.
Okay. Well, walk me through like what you were doing before you became the land captain, and then let's talk.
Well, I was standing guard in Fort Lewis, Washington, when I was drafted in the Army after I graduated from University of Miami. When I got out, I needed a job right away, and my stepfather knew. Anyway, he knew somebody that knew somebody, and I ended up with this insurance job. It was a very fine company. I mean, we're multi-generations of people would work for them, but over the years, they got bought up by a bigger corp, got bought up by a bigger corp. I mean, this company was, I'll tell you, it was Life of Virginia. They were around since the Civil War and out of Richmond, Virginia, lovely people. And, you know, they get sold out to uh, General Electric, and then then it becomes Genworth, and you know, anyway. And I got sick and tired of trying to sell insurance, sitting in at night and talking to people about something that a lot of people didn't want to talk about. So I thought anything's got to be better than this. I took a piece of paper and I wrote a crayon on it in red ink, and I put it on my boss's desk. I said, I quit. And I went out to lunch and I went and got a drink, and I never turned around, and I didn't have anything in my desk, and I never went back.
Did you have any idea what to do right then?
That was the end of it. And I had to do something. So do you remember John? You know John Donnell from being in the Keys?
Sure, yeah.
John Donnell had a little American sport canoe, a little 12-footer, and he was trying to get rid of a lot of his stuff while he left town. I used to shop in his store down here, and he said, you know, Steve, you want to? And I said, oh, I'd be happy to. In fact, I'll give you something for it. And I think at one point it actually fell off a trailer off the top of my car and splintered, and I learned how to do fiberglass work and everything, and I got it up to speed. But I started, guys were taking a chance on me, and I knew down there off of that, well, I fished primarily the Tamiami Trail. And I mean, I really caught a lot of tarpon and a lot of snook. And some tarpon up to 60, 70 pounds, or they caught them.
Wow. That's a big fish for in there.
Yeah. It's hell's a popping when you're in some little opening. And I wrote a story. I've got 2 books coming out now. One of them is going to be called End of the Line. I used to write a column for Florida Fishing Weekly.
Yeah.
Called End of the Line, and this is End of the Line 2.0, Steve Kantner reimagined. And I have a couple of stories in there. Swill Corrida, I remember there's stories about, I mean, I had tarpon, you know how they come up and they could see above water.
Sure.
And, you know, everybody thinks of them as a herring and that they don't have any, you know, macho and everything, and nothing could be further than the truth. And I got the wrong one time, and he stalked that boat, and he tried to jump across the boat 2 times.
Really?
And that story is, I used to come home and I used to fish that trail. My wife would lay a bottle of ammonia water out here, and you know, you get chiggers out there when you're walking along different places. And when I'd have my drink here, I'd have to get my pants off, and I used to have to wipe myself down all the way. You know, they always get where there's like, if you have your socks bloused, they're up here by, you know, your BVDs and stuff, and you had to get that on there and kill those chiggers. And in fact, one of the story, when I was at Florida Fishing Weekly, the story that I had the most comment on was about a young lady that I knew, married lady, who was a friend of mine, used to fish. She and her husband used to fish with me. And she used a public restroom down there on the trail, and she got them. And the name of the story was Chiggerella. And we had guys, and we had a lot of ladies would read. We had a pretty good circulation there, and they'd see this, and they say, I've got this, and my husband hasn't been fishing, and you know, it'd be crab lice. And what do I do, and all this kind of stuff. And when I was a young kid, I had some experience, like a lot of us did in Fort Lauderdale, with that, and they made certain compounds, but yeah, stuff like putting nail polish to smother them and everything is nonsense. So use mercury blue ointment and stuff like that. But anyway, that's where I got into the chigger thing. Basically, when I guided, I took myself really seriously, but I knew that when most of my action was confined to one body of water. It's 150 miles away from where I'm sitting right now, that I had to make sure everybody had a good time. So I looked at myself as an entertainer. And if it was a bad day, I would always try to cancel the trip. I would look when when the Weather Channel first came on. They used to give the temperatures for cities around the state, but if I could look up Naples, Florida, and the evening temperature was 70 degrees or lower, I knew for example, the Tamiami Trail Canal, it was going to be too cold, and the snook and the tarpon were going to move out of there en masse, and I would try to get out of the trip. But I knew places where it was a little deeper and this and that. I'd fish the Tamiami Canal where it first came out of Miami. And that's where on the bank, I remember landing, or the guy landing, my customer landing a 100-pound tarpon.
Wow.
Yeah, we were in deep water, and of course it wouldn't chill us quickly close to the bottom.
So how did you get to know the Tamiami area? First,
I'm sorry.
How did you get to know the Tamiami area when you were first starting? Did you learn it as a kid, or when did you start exploring that area?
Yeah, when I was a young kid, my father was in the saloon business, and he got an invitation to take his family, my mother and me, over to the Naples Beach Club or whatever. And I remember they were sitting at dinner, and they got sitting with this other couple, and the couple had a daughter who was just about my age. And this is just about the time I was a junior in high school. And I mean, I saw her, and I mean, it was like, it was, and we walked on the beach. And I mean, this is, we were very naive, but I walked out on that Naples pier and a lot of the stuff over there, and I saw these big fish, and there were a lot of them back then. And I always used to think to myself, you always wonder what happened and whatever, but that's all the way over there, riding in the car and riding back. I would see these cypress hammocks, and I would see all this water. And the first time, I never saw a fish, but I remember years later, Jody Moore, a friend of mine, and another guy, Alex Sweskin, that was in the writing business or whatever, they went over there, and it was dropping water like it is right now. And they saw all these birds lined up along the water there, with the runouts and the snook and the spoonbills and everything, just pummeling them. Marty Arostegui just sent me a picture of that the other day. And it took me a couple of times to learn what kind of fly to tie. And I wasn't a genius, but I was smart enough to get one of those bait fish somehow, see them get run up on the and pick one up. And they were mollies, black mollies, or gambusia, or mosquito fish. They were about, inch and a half long. But when they swim, they would push a little wake. And I came home here, and I mean, I didn't have to be a genius. Deer hair head, little collar around there. And back then was when they first came out with the craft fur, a little craft fur tail. And I'd do the stippling effect on the craft fur on a number 6 hook usually, and just take that thing and twitch across the surface. And, you'd see a flash and you'd be tight. I would tell you a funny story. It's to me, it was a very reinforcing story. I took a blind guy fishing, a guy who, he was a professor, I believe, at Cornell, and his daughter lived in town here, and she made the arrangements. She went and she dropped him off somewhere, and I picked him. Anyway, we went out there and did the whole thing, and we were going to rendezvous at the end of the day. And this guy was not born sightless. He became such later in life, and he could really fly cast. And I'd say, Tom, take one. I get him down the bank carefully, you've gone down a bank and you've got cars whizzing by and everything. And I'd look, and when there was no traffic, I'd say, now backcast, okay, strip another hand. And I'd get him close to the opposite bank. And then I'd get him to turn like a quarter turn the other way. And what you wanted to do, you wanted it to be like a quarter turn down current, stick your tip in the water, start stripping. You see the flash, and none of this jerk, just and off they go. And I mean, some of these snook were, 12, 18 pounds, and boy, they would go like a firecracker. And that was the coolest day. I mean, this guy splooged. I mean, he really had a good time on the way home. And he told all his friends, and you know how it works. Then they tell their friends. I'm sure it's like you with a permit.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I've known of you for years and years as the permit master. Yeah. And when we talked the other night, you said, hey, when we were talking about pier fishing, when I told you the reason I didn't have a boat, I didn't have enough money for one. And I fished the beach, the piers, and the canals. And you said that didn't they catch a world record permit off Lake Worth Pier? I said, I knew the guy that did it.
That's right.
Yeah, George Brooker.
Wow.
And we used to have him
catching a fish like that off a pier, a world record permit. I mean, just any large permit off a pier. It just seems like a billion ways to lose.
Say, Tommy Anglin, whose family owned Anglin's Pier in Lauderdale by the Sea, he got a tarpon that strapped out. They did, the very similar formula that these guys use, for guesstimating a weight. And they had one that was like right up at about 250 pounds that this guy caught on a Shakespeare service reel. We used to use little short Calcuttas. And in fact, I remember the reel, and the reel broke one time, and they brazed it. You couldn't get parts for stuff. This is back in the Paleolithic times. And he landed this tarpon, and they released it. And on the pier up there at Lake Worth, I caught a blackfin tuna off there.
Wow.
And lots and lots of bonitas and kingfish. And you go up in the Panhandle. And my friend Bob Michaels, I mean, he sent me a picture to use in this Man Chenille book. They catch the tuna fish regularly off those piers in the middle of winter with an offshore wind. And I've got all kinds of cool shots for this book. Snow on the beach and everything. Snowed in Tallahassee.
Yeah, well, it did this year. I don't know.
Yes,
but we had snow in the Panhandle for sure, and I bet it happened probably since what you're talking about. I mean,
absolutely was. I know you've got some canyons out there in the Gulf, and I know that there are places that you can fish that you don't have to go as far to shore. Also, I wrote a book a number of years ago. It was I did this for Tom Perrow and Wild River Press. It was titled 50 Women Who Fish. And if you ever try to talk to 50 women, it's you better make sure you have a martini sitting on the thing, besides a full. But the one girl was, or a couple of those ladies fished out of there. The one had this beautiful Cajun name, Mo something or other. I'm trying to remember her. And I mean, she did it all.
Got Mo.
She bodybuilt to keep herself.
Oh yeah, no.
Savoy Newman. Mo, that was her name.
Yeah.
And now I guess the husband she has a camp up there somewhere, and they run down that thing down to get out in the ocean. And I mean, that's a run. I mean, that's a $2,000 a day gig to do. And I had some people who've done it. But she was lovely to talk to.
Yeah.
She grew her own vegetables like I do. She worked out. I used to, a couple hours every day. Over here we have a gym at our club. Then I got to the fact that I realized that there was more to it than just heavy lifting, and I'd do the running and the lifting, and I'd do it a measured number of days a week, so I'd have time to make a living and go fishing.
Nice. Did you think that helped you?
You're right on the South Fork and Middle River out here. I call it the canal.
Yeah.
And we have fish out here.
Nice.
We did have fish out here.
When you were guiding like that, were you exercising so that you would be better at your job?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I did
absolutely. I think it's important, and I think you did something like that
the
one
did
time.
very I still do today. But
Yeah, yeah. And
most,
you get somebody. The only reason I can't do it as well, and I do straps. Pardon me, I do it. You know, I've got Parkinson's, and I don't know why. We never had it in my family. I never took any kind of, performance enhancers or anything else. I got it. What I did do over here in our neighborhood, we had a Episcopal church had a community garden, and for some reason I'm not the most religious guy in the world, but they let me read the scriptures in the morning because I could pronounce the words,
yeah.
and they were nice to me, and they let me have. Essentially, it was a couple of acres that we had under growth, and you didn't have to be a member of the church or whatever. In our neighborhood, with the exception of this Camelot that I live in here, that's walled and wired and everything else, the condominium is an underserved neighborhood, and we used to have a place we used to give away the vegetables, or you could come here. You didn't have to be an Anglican. You could be I don't care. You could be a Muslim and go ahead and garden it there. We didn't care less. And finally, you know what happens? The developer goes riding down the street and gets the sniff of possible profit, and he gets in there, and he encouraged the garden for a while, but then somebody made an offer, and hasta luego, and that was it.
So
When they tore that up, it broke my heart. We had cats we used to feed over there, stray cats. My wife used to take care of them, and we brought a half a dozen or five of them in this house here,
wow.
and they live with us just on the fourth floor. We don't let them run free or anything,
Uh-huh.
and we never had children. It just always had a soft spot for animals.
Yeah.
I mean, we weren't kids when we got married. We were 30 or so, or 31 or whatever.
Gotcha.
And I
So,
mean, I had been married once before, but that's another story.
well, tell me about when you first you quit this job with your life insurance, and then what happens in the meantime before you decide that maybe guiding out of
No, I knew I had to go to work. I
right.
knew right then and there.
Okay.
And I thought, what am I going to do? And I had some business cards made that very day made. Um, it was land captain something or other or whatever. They weren't as sophisticated a card or the same card stock I used later. But I went and I distributed them, and I got involved in any kind of, and the internet wasn't real big back
Right.
then. But I gave them to people, and I did this and that, and after a while, I had a job,
Yeah.
and I'd have them ask me
Remember,
questions, and
you remember your
everybody's
first
always
trip?
looking for a deal. Like, hey, I know you're slower in the summertime. Um, can I have a trip for half price? I'm saying the days are longer in the summertime. What I'm going to do is I'm going to charge you twice as much. Don't call this house again.
Do you remember your first trip?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I sure do. I had these two young guys, just fired up, balls to the wall. Let's go fishing, fly fishing. And I had discovered this place on Highway 92 where there was a hole in the bushes and you could see the tarpon rolling back there. I put the boat in the water and they tried to get in it and they turned the boat over and everybody swam for shore and everything. We got back in it again and went in there. And I had all the accessories I'd gotten for myself and everything. And I would sit in the middle or I'd be on my knees. Imagine me trying to do that now. And we had the safety equipment and everything. But I would paddle and I had a push pull and I'd get in real shallow water. I had a short push pull, like 10 feet, and I could push along without making any noise. And these guys ended up catching, I forget, they got like 3 snook, I'm going to say over 18 pounds of the tarpon. And I mean, they were, inconsolable. I mean, they were so excited about it and everything else. And, back then I even took an ad in a magazine.
I remember the
Uh,
ads in the magazine. I remember your ad.
yeah, and
It had
got
like it
absolutely
had like
nothing for it. I know that.
it had a station wagon, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. Did your
Yeah, I had the first car I had. The very first was I had no, I had a Honda Accord, the Accord, I used to call it. And I had my rods out the window and everything else. And then I got these things where you could take it, the suction cups, I still
yeah,
have them, and
Orvis?
put the rod on the window and have it back. And I'd have the canoe, up next to that. I used to mount the canoe on blocks. And it was after that that I got a Cherokee Laredo that actually had the rack on top. And I would go and, I had to pick that canoe up, which we kept it on a rack back here. I used to pay rent for the rack, of course, and pick that thing up, clean it, walk it over, and get it on that, slide it on there, and get everything tied down front and back and everything, so there was no slippage. And down the road we go. And I had that mother come off the car out here on Alligator Alley one time. I was going 70 miles an hour, and it just went sailing through the air, and it landed. It made this beautiful landing, and I got it picked up, and I got it up there again, and it had never cracked. My canoes, the ones I used, they had that, what do you call it, tumble home design. It was fairly flat on the bottom.
Yes.
I didn't have any of those racing canoe, that shape or whatever. And I had everything. I would sit in the middle, and I'd have a cushion I'd kneel on, and I'd be up there by that center thwart where I had the thwart bag with all my stuff. And I still have some of the cases I carried my flies in. And I remember one of them I got from Flip Palette, or one of them sent me a video one time. And I went and took some strips of either rubber or a similar compound and glued them in there. And I used to use that for the flies that I used all the time. And palette, I we were when I was at Florida Fishing Weekly. He'd occasionally have something to say, and he also, there was that other guy who was I'm trying to think, the bodybuilder type
Rob Fordyce.
Yeah, yeah.
Fordyce, yeah.
No, it wasn't Fordyce. It was his cousin or his nephew.
Oh, Rick Murphy.
Rick Murphy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now Fordyce was good buddies with Donnell.
Right.
Yeah, and he used to go. I remember this. I remember seeing him at the ramp and stuff like that, and he'd wear that thing. It was like an executioner's helmet or mask on his face. I remember that. And basically, I built the business I had by, word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's it. There's
so
no more to say.
You did that type of guiding for 30 years?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when I first did it. I got out of the service in 1970 or 71, and I was fishing then. So you're going to say, by at least 1980. Well, I got married in 1978, and I was sure in hell doing that kind of fishing back then. And I've been married. I'm looking at my Swan over here, my pleasure unit. We've been married for 45 years.
Nice. That's awesome. In that time, like when you're fishing the Tamiami Trail and you're talking about those years, the 70s,
Yeah.
the early 80s, there was a tremendous amount of especially in fly fishing, advances in technology that happened.
Yes.
I mean, saltwater fly fishing and the type of fly fishing that you were doing, really, it was like when Lefty Cray, Chico Fernandez, Flip Palette, those guys were doing that type of fishing in the early days. It was all basically with trout gear that they had somehow adapted to this.
As it was with me.
Right.
And I got to Lefty Cray and I became friends. And this is I don't know, I was somewhere and I asked him a question or something. I was watching one of his demonstrations at a boat show. And I don't know, I think it was like he wanted to argue with me. I said, no, you're wrong. And like, what? He and I became friends. And we used to do seminars together here. And there was a lady who used to live here, deceased now. We used to take care of the food. I used to book seminars for like 30 people maximum. And we used to get like, I don't know, $500, $600 a piece. It was an all-day thing.
Yeah.
And Cray and I would do them together, and he'd talk. And of course, there was always casting lessons with him. And he and I used to fish together alone a lot. I remember him showing me how to spay cast when he first learned about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a couple of spay rods. And if you look at my thing, I've got pictures. I've caught some snook and tarpon and big, on a spay. And I would, to me, you can also overhead cast it, but that don't, wow, the tug is a drug, I guess, is what you guys say out west.
That's right.
And when I had that with that 50 women, I got a couple of these cuties from British Columbia who were my stars, and they knew the whole story. They knew how to be pretty. The one girl used to work at a casino.
April Vogt.
Yeah, and she got involved. Somebody hit her, and help. Well, it's like here or anywhere. They didn't have any kind of insurance, and she was in a hospital for I don't know how long, and she knew she had to make the best of herself, and she had some fly fishing experience. The first thing she ever did was April Vokey. Is she used to take people on sturgeon charters, on the bank. Mm-hmm. Up there on I forget which river, but there was Skeena or something. Well, that's a whole bunch of rivers, and she had seen some old man had had released a steelhead. The guy could really handle a fly rod. And she walked over and talked to him, and this guy took her under his wing, and he wasn't like Chester the molester. I mean, he was always nice, and he never made her uncomfortable, and he's what really got her going. And she just fell in love with it. She told me, she said, I'd be here. And we used to go when I was in high school. I forget the town in British Columbia. They always used to win the award for some theatrical presentation you could do. And there were 3 of us girls who used to share an apartment. These other girls would be, with their boyfriends and stuff, and she'd be out on the floor there taking her rear tackle apart and cleaning it and everything else. She told me one time, we had a very funny meeting up at, he said there were 3 things I could do. She said, I can fly fish. She said, I can sing, and I can fight. And she's a real feisty girl. I'm on her hit list for top fan or something now.
Is that right?
All these years later. Yeah.
She's done very well. I had her on the podcast.
Beautiful woman.
Yeah, she's got a great podcast also. She's done very well in the fishing. I want to know what
yeah, she has.
I want to know what innovations you saw in your early days of guiding on the Tamiami Trail that you thought were the biggest help to.
Well, I'll start out with one that I learned here in Alligator Alley. There was a guy who was a wonderful guy that lived down the street. A lot of guys knew. His name was Jack Allen. He was a bass guide.
Mm-hmm.
And he found that by overlining his rod about 4 sizes, in other words, and he used to make his own rods. He used to buy good blanks. And you'd have a 4 and you'd have an 8 weight on it. Because, when you're going down the middle of the canal, you only have to make a quick shot, and then just pop, pop, pop. Also, something I learned was you want a big bass. If I had 2 fishermen with me, you'd alternate, pull a thing ashore. The guy in front that threw 45 degrees ahead of the canoe was always the one who got the 6 or the 7 pounder. It was never, never the guy in back. They catch plenty of fish, but it was always the guy up front that was quartering ahead of the canoe that got the big bass.
Interesting. What about
And we have water containment areas.
What about the largemouth?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
We're just have a little bit of a delay. What about the largemouth bass? Since you started to today, what has changed with the largemouth bass on the Tamiami Trail or the alligator?
Well, I learned something about them. There are definitely two subspecies. The one of them are the bass out here that come up and hit poppers and stuff. And there was another, I'm going to call it the subspecies of bass that I called marsh bass. And they weren't aggressive. When it was cold, a school of them would follow these little gambusia flies and go nip, nip, and all of a sudden you'd have them, and they'd go ape shit. It was like catching a bluefish. They were wonderful. There are a couple of places they have them. They have them inside the Outer Banks up at Ocracoke, and I think they might have them out in the somewhere in the Gulf Coast where the water is basically brackish. But most of my fishing was saltwater marsh fishing. We used to catch redfish also. Mm-hmm. And I'd had experience in a boat. I did in my life have two small, 16-foot V-hull runabouts. And we take them places where we knew to run them aground and then just get out and chase the fish. But we had one time, this guy had a flat bottom boat when the limit used to be 10. And I remember we brought 30 of these things home, and I had a big freezer in my kitchen and cleaned them all night long. And after, if you're ever, you're gutting them and stuff like that. And if you cut the gut cavity wrong, it'd smell like an angelfish, and I could never eat one again. Sea trout was another thing with all the worms, like bad as an amberjack.
Right. Yes.
Just on part of the body, though.
Yes. So, but when you first started guiding, were there more largemouth bass than later when the exotics were introduced?
There were bass clubs who adopted that point of view, and I'm not going to say there were. Particularly since bass fishing was pretty much a catch and release sport, but there's a lot of people, and a lot of these people are underserved, and a fish is a fish, and they take it. And I mean, I guess you can't blame them. But there were bass clubs who vociferously insisted that the exotics are the death of everything and whatever. And where we got a lot of the exotics, incidentally, was from fish farms.
Really?
That and from people, emptying their aquarium in fresh water.
So was there ever? So you're saying that a lot of the exotics were accidental, but was there ever? I mean, the peacock bass was introduced.
Deliberately by a really good friend of mine, Paul Shaflin. I still hear from him, and he got a lot of flack for that.
What do you think about it?
But there were several different subspecies. I can't say I ever ate one. I have no interest in it. We release them, but I mean, they eat their weight in a lot of these things. In fact, there was a time where we have a fish down there in Coral Gables. There's only a couple of canals that have it, called the Midas cichlid, and they're honest to God, they're big and they're bright as a goldfish.
Yeah.
And the only time that you could get them to hit a fly was, and it was not this on top fly, was when the peacocks were spawning, because they would go in there and try to eat the peacock spawn. In other words, there was this homeostasis between both types of fish. I used to make a thing called the Midasizer, and it was a long shank trout hook, I forget the number, with a little, and I would have a clevis, and I would have a little spinner blade up at the front, and I think I would have a like a bead, and I was never big for, as far as a bead on a fly, or a weighted bead. If you want a jig, use a jig. It's okay. I don't care. It's just a different thing. and you let that thing sink and you go down with that thing swimming after, and here they come. You knew whether they would or they wouldn't. It would either be come one, come all, or they wouldn't, and you just barely move that along, and boop, boop, they keep nipping it. And I remember Alan Zaremba, nobody did more for, exotic fishing than Alan Zaremba. And he said, you can't make that into a sport fish. And I remember my sport caught 21 of them one day. Huh. Midas.
Really?
And, or maybe it was Shaflin that said it. I don't remember. He sure as hell got them. And at that one time of year, you could get them good. Out here where I live, which is brackish water, well, it's becoming, you're supposed to have saltwater intrusion, but you wouldn't know it for here. We have a dam west of here. And when they let enough water out of here, we get grass carp, and we also get the Midas cichlids that come over. And of course, the water it's deep enough out here. This was dredged. It wasn't sucked like the Tamiami Trail. That incidentally is very interesting. The trail, as a result that it was siphoned, that it was sucked, the stuff that's laying on top at your feet is the stuff that came from the deepest there.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I've got some stuff. I've got some things I took. I have some fossilized stuff.
Really?
Yeah, and I've finally made friends with this Betty Osceola, or at least Facebook friends for what that's worth. And I had written a chapter in Manchineel. It's Seminole versus Miccosukee, and the whole thing about the Seminole Wars and this and that. And I want her. What I like to do is I strive for accuracy for a couple of reasons. Number one, the existence of lawyers. And, he said I said that and I didn't. I want to have it in writing that right. They did. And the other thing is, if they love you well, they'll let you crib a couple of photos, high resolution photos you can stick in there. And nowadays, where when we were kids, we read novels and stuff like that. We did, there were illustrations in there. Now, illustrated books, as long as you keep the illustrations, I'm not going to say to a minimum, but at least have a few for each story. They sell a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm always looking for an angle, and who knows? After 50 years of clawing and scraping, maybe I'll become an overnight success.
You may have. It does happen to people. 50 years.
Oh no, it has.
You're an overnight success. 50 years in the making. That definitely happens to people. Now, when we first started getting started for this other podcast that we had technical difficulties for, we had a conversation, and you told me that you were attacked by a Florida Panther. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. In fact, you remember Sue Cocking that used to write for the Miami Herald?
Yeah.
She was with me when it happened. Yeah, I was. And we were fishing on I forget it, right the border between Palm Beach and Broward County up there. And I think it was the L5 canal or whatever. And all of a sudden, I saw this thing, and they're very intolerant of being bothered. And I saw him. He was across the canal, hiding in the bushes. And I said, "Sit, Susan, sit." She was in my car. "Don't get out." And I went back there. I was looking around and everything. And all of a sudden, that thing had gotten across that canal. And here he come a-running. It looked like, you see what one of those things looks like on a Greyhound bus, stretched out, like there's only going to be one cat on my how many hectares of land that I claim, and it's going to be me, and I'm going to kill you. And he came. Susan was screaming at the top of her lungs, and this thing came bounding up the bank, and I was able to jump up on top of the car. Okay, yeah, I'd be dead now. And at the last minute, when he couldn't make, kind of get me sighted in for that lunge, grab you, break the back of your neck. He veered off and he went, get up, sideways, and he was gone. And I had to go, when I knew he was gone, I had to slide off there and go about 100 yards behind the car, drop my pants to see if I crap myself. But that scared the living shit. In fact, I still have some friends, ladies in the fishing business. That story got around pretty good. I guess they figured if anybody was, raw enough to pull something like that, they'd do anything. I saw Everglades minks. I've been bitten by rattlesnakes, the whole deal.
Wow.
I mean, I kid you not, and I've had a couple of real close calls. One where the snake, where a moccasin had a rat in his mouth and he couldn't, get it out in time to go at me. Oh, it was a frog. I remember. These Cuban tree frogs, these bufo? That's curare that they exude when they do it. And this moccasin had his sights on that thing and went over there and grabbed him. And, it's like the frog just, started excreting this foam, and the moccasin spit him out like, it's a neurotoxin. I mean, it's real serious shit. I mean, if you have, like here, we have them come up here in our courtyard here. Occasionally we'll get a land crab, or we'll get these toads. And if a doggy grabs them, if it's a bufo, you better get a hose in his mouth right away, or he's going to go into paroxysms and his heart's going to stop. That's curare. That's what these blowgun people use in Brazil.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. And
so this moccasin had one of those in its mouth, and that's why it didn't bite you?
Couldn't get rid of it. Yeah. And up the hill there, this is on the C11, I think, Griffin Road Canal. Jody Moore's standing there, and he's like, look out, look out, look out. And he's up there, and I think he got a picture of it. But anyway, I narrowly escaped. And I mean, there's all kinds of recipes, for what to do. I met some guys that were working for the state. They were out there tooling around in an airboat one time, and the one guy got bitten. Moccasins are quasi-aggressive. I mean, they will do stuff. Sure. I was fishing with Marty Orostegui, who's a little guy, and, body weight wise, that could have been real bad. He came this close to getting nailed. I just back away. Do not turn around. Just keep backing up. And he was taking a leak in the bushes. I mean, it's out in the middle of nowhere. And, something like that. I knew when I used to guide, I used to know everybody, every hospital that had, for just about anything, that they call it polyvalent antivenin. But for a coral snake, and I had a close call with one of those, literally. Man, the trick is you gotta cauterize that thing. I don't care if it's tight enough that you don't have any feeling. You don't want any of that to get to you. It's like it's a mamba, it's a cobra, and get there real quick. Somebody call ahead. Got a guy here bit by black and yellow kill a fella. Get him in here, and all I got to do is keep you alive for about 4 or 5 hours. Keep your heart going, and you're all right. You don't get any necrotic tissue. I mean, I can still see. I've still got 2 puncture wounds where I got bitten by the rattler.
Wow.
I mean, this wasn't a Eastern Diamondback; it was a pygmy or whatever. But they can still make you sick. My wife, ironically, had after all these years, completely unexpected, she had a mitral or a what do you call it, a aortal a blockage or whatever, and she had to have open heart surgery.
Wow.
And had we not caught that on a routine visit to the doctor, and when you're old, they got a reason for you to go all the time. And just today, I had somebody call me from some phony service and say they wanted my Medicare number.
Right.
Oh no, I mean when there's a bullseye on you when you turn 65, they come out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
And now that's I can get a lot of trouble for that. We hear. What, Mickey?
Didn't a snake come up and sit on your lap once?
Oh yeah, yeah. I've had this many times. Black racers, blue racers, and stuff like that. I've had them. There were places where to get from my car to where I have to drag my canoe would be 100 yards or whatever, and boom, I'd have a blue racer drop out of the tree and get on my neck. And I was sitting the one time. We used to call it. I think I called it Waterman's Bridge on the trail. And I was sitting down eating my lunch, just a bridge that leads off into the sawgrass. And I was eating a tuna fish sandwich. It was cold as a witch's, you know what. And cold, clear barometer, probably 30.7 or something like that. And downwind from me, I can see, and I don't know if he senses the warmth or the smell, but here comes this great big blue snake, or was he I can't even remember. And he comes, oh, wait a minute, cat fighting. And he comes, and I'm sitting there cross-legged on this bridge, and he coils up in my lap to get warm, and I've got my camera there. And this is back when we used to shoot E6 or whatever, as I recall. I think this was before digital. But he gets up, and he's licking my face, you know, checking me out and everything else. No, that was a moccasin.
Wow.
I remember that now. Yes. And he went, and he finally got tired of it. And I didn't move any fidgets or whatever. I said, now, don't you think just a little, and he can hear the resonance or whatever. And he finally, after he'd warmed up, I didn't move my hands an inch, and he went off and he squirmed up into the thing, and I went,
wow, that's close.
I said, my wife's not going to believe it. Oh, I've had all kinds of stuff. 2 times I got caught in believe it or not, down here, a tornado. And the one time I was coming down the Tamiami Trail to not 90, the one that goes up to Alligator Alley. And I see it cross the road in front of me. I said, is that what I think it is? And all of a sudden I see this cloud of debris and, you know, half a cypress tree up in the air, 200 feet and everything. And I went, holy smegma. And I go and I got to make a turn on whatever there and head up towards the alley. And here I have to stop in the middle of traffic, and thank God there was nobody out there while this thing goes wailing in front of me.
Wow.
And oh man, the sky turns, I never forget this. The sky turns, you know, like blue and pink and everything else. And whoa, I mean, you know, I mean, I thought, man, I have time to say my prayers. I'm happy if I get out of this. But a lot of stuff like that.
Did you have customers when you would have these close calls, most of them with customers?
With customers,
yeah.
Walking out and stuff. Well, the blind guy I took fishing, I mean, I thought that he could, you know, walk out in front of traffic. I had what, Vicki? Oh, she remembers some stuff, remembered better than I do. But what I used to do, I had trouble. See, my first fishing out there was Alligator Alley. And then I got the idea about dropping down, and I extended my range and started going on the trail.
Didn't you have a customer when that alligator stopped your boat?
Oh, yeah. I've had a bunch of times with alligators, usually during the walkabout right now, you know, March, April, and May. And yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there were times they'd come up and, you know, they're mostly looking for rough fish. If you get a gar or whatever, a mudfish. And, you know, this is when I was learning. I mean, I could get some big ones, but I had one time that I pulled my boat ashore out there at the first rest stop on the alley, and the gator had been following me. And one thing I've read, at least, is they can go 40 miles an hour in a straight thing for, you know, a couple hundred feet, but they're no good, on a zigzag. And I zigzag, and he came a hell, and I jumped up on the hood. I remember the car I had then, got up on the hood, and the son of a bitch came up there. But I had 5 or 6 times that I had an alligator actually attack and bite the boat.
Wow.
But they can't, with a tumble home like that, he can't get his thing around. If he'd have bit right there at the tail of the head, I mean, he could have shook it or whatever. And you'd see all kinds of
That
stuff.
shark that bit your paddle that time when we were in
Oh yeah, Vicky reminds me. We were over at Sanibel one time, and I took my canoe along, and that whole crew over there was a place you could launch your boat, but they weren't real happy about it. They wanted you to rent one from them, but you go around, and I was using my push pole, and it was right there at Sanibel Island. It was the Ding Darling Preserve.
Yeah.
The guy, yeah. And there's like this oil gland at the one end of it, and then there's a straight canal that you can go around and come out the other end. But I was in there one time, and with Vicky, and all of a sudden I'm going along, I'm standing up in the boat, and I used to be able to stand and pull, and she's sitting down, and here comes, and I shit you not, because we weighed some of them out when I was a kid. Here comes a lemon shark, come racing along, and I'm pushing, and he sees my push pole, and he comes and I push him. I try to make a feint, and he turns around in a circle, almost blows the canoe out of the water, and tries to grab the push pole, which I still have right outside where I'm sitting. Yeah, and whoa, and Vicky is screaming, But
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of sharks these days. There's a lot of people.
Yeah, ever since. Well, you know what caused that? That kid got bit up in Palm Beach. You know that story.
Right, and that caused.
Yeah. There was a kid up at Stewart, swimming by the jetty, by the, what do they call it? Oh God, I got a picture of it. Bathtub Beach, and it's the northeast wind. Mullet are coming down the beach in droves. The water's dirty and everything, and the mullet are spraying. And some girls, ooh, I think I see a porpoise. I mean, I'm not making fun of a kid narrowly escaping death, but they react. It's not just to sound, as you know, but to resonance, electromagnetic resonance. It feels the kid there, and it gives the kid a good shake and shit like that. And the kid narrowly makes it to the beach, and there was a lifeguard or somebody called, and they got her to a hospital, to an ICU, and she spent some time in there. And then one of these super moms, is going to fix it. The reason that shark was in there, because guys are launching their rowboats and fishing for sharks off the beach, which, I mean, if you know anything about the longshore current that they have north of like Boca Raton, I mean, you could drop a thing of food coloring in the water or whatever, and or I could dive in the water and I won't surface for 100 yards. It's so fast when the swells are coming in, northeast swell. But yeah, I remember that. But having snakes jump on me and wreck loose spiders, I've had that 3 times.
Man,
that's pretty serious, actually.
That can really get you.
You get sick.
in the Bahamas when that shark tried to take your fish off.
Oh yeah. Vicky reminds me. Wickstrom, in a rare moment of kindness, sent Vicky and I to Deepwater Cay in the Bahamas to get a story for him. And I ended up flying with Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway's son.
Yeah.
And a delightful guy, incidentally. And we were out, at Deepwater Cay, everybody uses, fiberglass poles for $150 aren't, they don't have a marine store. So they use a big pine stave and they're pushing. And I remember I hooked what I guess for the Bahamas is a big bonefish. And he takes off running, and of course he runs for the crown of the flat. And we're in the boat, and this guy is still pushing along. And here comes this big lemon, just chugging after him and running him in a circle and running him up. And I said, screw that. You're not going to get my fish. And I dive in the water, and I run up on him, and and I dive right on top of the lemon shark. I remember Vicky's in the boat and watching this, and the concussion is like this boom, and I thought that I was be missing a leg or something like that, but it just knocked the like the water wave or whatever. And here's I'd thrown my rod and reel in my fly rod in the water, and here's my line, and I start bringing it back, and here's the bonefish in this little tiny couple of foot deep thing, and he's bleeding, and I'm able to get him up, and I release him, and I've got my chatillon with me, and he weighs something like 10 1/4 pounds or whatever.
Wow.
You know,
It's a
deep
good.
water K. I mean, you know, they're almost like that or whatever. But I went back, and I'd been all week, and there were a bunch of Brits there, and a fishing rider, and he can't get anything, that kind of stuff. And I come in the last minute before the chalks or whatever it is ready to take off for Fort Lauderdale, and I entered that in the book, and I got a little RESP, for that. That went down pretty good. That story got around pretty fast. Yeah, that's back in the days. Two doctors from, I forget where, owned it. I remember Vicky and I sitting up having cocktails with them or whatever for a while. I know the ownership has gone back and forth, and I think the place is pretty much in disrepair.
I don't know.
In fact, that reminds me of a story. I met a guy when I was steelhead fishing on the Kalama River out west, and I had a camera, and I said, "Give me your address. I'll take a picture and send it to you." And he got talking to me, and we communicated probably back then by letter. And he was talking about places he'd been, and he talked to me about the Bahamas and Grand Bahama and Deepwater K and everything else in the club. And he was friends with the guy Gil Drake Jr.
Yeah.
Went to University of North Carolina with him, and that was the guy who originally started it. God, you're sharpening my memory. I mean, it's recall.
I haven't thought about that in a long time. But Gil Drake was he was the man in Key West when I
I understand he was.
Yeah, he was really good. I used to see him fishing all the time. Him, Steve Huff, Del Brown, all those guys. Harry.
Oh yeah, Del Brown, the permit guy, also Steve Huff. He's I've spoken with him once. Andy Mill, it does this bonefish tarpon unlimited stuff or whatever, and I went when it didn't hurt quite as much to walk. I went to one of those seminars and walked around. One of the ladies was there who was one of my profiles for 50 women, and it was very interesting and listened to, and so on and so forth.
Tell me about the fishing before the exotics versus the fishing after the exotics on the Tamiami Trail.
Well, the exotics, from my knowledge, the exotic invasion came around early 1970s. Okay, and the proliferation of fish farms. There, of course, tilapia. I've eaten tilapia before. I've been invited to people's houses. It tastes like sautéed roofing tile. I mean, or horrible. But that was the very first of it. And by the later 1970s, that's back in the days. Well, I was single then, and here in Lauderdale, and all these bars would have an aquarium. I used to call them, everything was, the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Aquarius, my name is Larry. And every one of these fern bars would have an Oscar. The big O would be in there, like Nature Spoken Here and stuff like that. I mean, these things didn't get flushed down a toilet.
Right.
And that's what really attributed to most of it. And I knew from Shaflin, sometimes a degree in ambient temperature difference would determine if the state was taking, they would go somewhere, and they were doing creel census. And of course, there was no limit on Oscars and Mayans. And if it was a little warm, or I forget which was which, and there'd be like 80,000 Mayans and, 10,000 Oscars. And if the temperature was the other differential, it would be, the inverse of that. But that was it.
Yeah.
And
what about the peacocks? Did that change your fishing when they
oh
were?
yeah, no, they eat them. They eat them. They eat them. There's stasis now, and the peacocks are a good fish. They're a good gamey fish, and basically, I'd spot them, and we had them here, South Lauderdale. You'd see them in the water, and you could throw to them, and you let the fly sink to the bottom, and strip, get the fly out of the water, get it out of the water, back cast it out of the water, throw it back cast out of the water, and you'd see the fish start to change colors and everything else. Now, if you'd go and nip it, you tried to set the hook, it'd ping, and the hook would come out, and he'd be gone. But you do that, and sometimes it'd take 6, 7, 8 times letting it sit there. It sink to the bottom, and he'd pick it up like, what do you call it, Mr. Creosote with one thin mint, and he'd go, and then finally, and you'd go to pick it up, and this time he'd have had enough, and he'd snatch that thing, and you'd strip strike or whatever you had to do, and there he was, and out he'd go. And I got to the point that I learned to read. If I had guys with me that didn't have the eyes or didn't know what to look for, I used to carry a plug rod or a spinning rod with me with one of these big, it was the famous plug that everybody used. It was the one with the where you'd have the hole from the head down to the, and you had a place where you could, attach a treble to, and I wouldn't attach a treble. I would attach a swivel, and I'd throw it out, let it sink, and if I'd see a flash, then I'd know, and I'd say, come over here, throw it there, pick it up, throw it there, and, repeat my procedure, and, they loved them, and they're real pretty.
Yeah.
And
they are. If you could,
everybody likes that.
Yeah, for sure. If you could relive one day.
I had some Palm Beach guides come down. I had, I remember Steve Anderson and, what's his name? The famous guide from up there.
Beach.
Yeah, it was. Oh Christ, my mind is. He was one of Anderson's friends, and he used to grow. He had a what do you call it? We used to grow okras and put them up in a can, and they were, that whole Jupiter bunch was very, they would really work together a lot, of all the guides, and they used to have this big holiday party, and they'd have all the snook, and they'd have the cobia and stuff like that, and everybody was scarfing on it. But the thing that was big back then was we're catching toadies, and toadies were little blowfish. And I used to catch them here in Lauderdale. I never tried to eat them. But my friend Anderson got one where they must have pierced somehow an internal gland or whatever, and he ate it, and he got that ciguatera poisoning, and it was a $30,000 trip to 2 emergency rooms that night. Oh. And yeah, wow. Butch was the guy.
Butch Constable?
Butch Constable.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came down here and fished for peacocks with me, and they catched him up. That was pretty funny. That was good.
I bet he did. He was a legend. I think.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what it is with a lot of them. You get to a point, and it's you work for it. You put in time, and he would take, I understand, his better customers fishing. Repeaters, ones that come every year, and somebody that would stroke him pretty good. And there's no reason to think that when you've been in a business that long, that you're not worth more now as, say, for example, a neurologist than you are as a general practitioner.
Right.
And he knew everything. And I fished with him out in the boat before for robios and stuff like that. And I remember one of those those monster turtles coming up with the cobies behind there and hooking them. And we used to fish off the beach. I remember, off the boat. Anderson and he got, I think, something on the jig off the beach, just within you could have thrown a rock up in the beach up at Hope Sound, 70 some pompano one time. And, you know, they had licenses, and I was fishing shares with them. And I used to catch a lot of pompano. We used to get them on the pier down here. And I say we used to catch a lot of permit.
Yeah, that's what
Indian River pompano. And I would see when Vicki and I think, no, it was when I was first married. I used to live in Lauderdale by the sea, and I used to like to, you know, slip out, and the Commercial Boulevard Bridge was there, and you'd see this big honker laying under the bridge with all the snook laying by the fender. And I mean, you know, hooking the thing in a situation like that would have been futile. I just, you know, it's like walking out in the Keys Bridge. We used to walk out on 7 Mile. Used to have a nail apron, and I used to have a Penn 309. I still have the rod I used to use. It's sitting over here. And used to have mirror lures. This is before we even used pikeys and stuff. And you'd see these tarpon on a fallen tide, and you'd throw that mirror lure and click, 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 flash. Wow. And right away, they'd run a little line, and they'd go through the bridge. Wait a minute, can you hear me, Vicky? The Inky knocked the, can you still hear me?
I got you. Yes.
Okay, yeah, the cat knocked the one thing out. And you'd go to the other, and sometimes you had to do it for yourself, and I've done a double before. I go over there with my spinning rod and snag my line up and go hand over hand back to myself, throw my rod and reel in the, you know, custom rod in the water, and it wouldn't even touch the water. It'd come up, your hands were burning, you'd have it, and this tarpon would be boogieing. And I'll tell you, I had a tarpon. I still have it. I think a 10,000 ambassador, and I used to. With it, I had 30-pound stren, which was thin. It wasn't like 30-pound Andy, and I had one almost dump, and I brought that fish back to like right up here. And what are you going to do? I'm not going to bridge gap it. We used to carry. One guy would have me caught carrying the bridge gap. We would take those great big. They weren't forged, but those great big Jewfish hooks, shark hooks, yeah. And we'd have them welded together, and we'd have a piece of chain or a piece of poly rope in there. And I did pull a Goliath grouper up on the bridge one time, about 150, 160 pounds. Two of us, you'd walk a little bit, it'd get your heels dug in, and the other guy would walk a little bit. Then we got it up and threw it in the trunk of I remember I had a Dodge Charger. We drive it down to Marathon. There was a place called the, what do you call it, grill? And they'd throw it, they'd have it lashed up and stuff, and they'd throw it in the water. And then they'd wait until dinner time, and they'd pull it up and they'd kill it and clean it. And I thought that, to me, that was one of the best tasting groupers. And that's where I got into, you know, you'd get one of those baskets, you know, with fried grouper, you know, with the French fries and stuff like that, and drinking beers. And well, those were the good old days.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, man.
So as we finish up here, if you were to look back on your career and you're to think about like the perfect weather, the perfect day, what really drove you to loving that career so much, what would that day look like?
What the day would be like would be a bright, inquisitive client. It was nice when they brought their wives along. You know, it's always like a little beauty in the thing. And somebody who was enthusiastic and would get excited when they would catch something. Someone who was respectful. You know, I mean, the gratuity always entered into the equation at the end. But I think at the end, the ideal day was a nice sunny day where we didn't have to pull out all the rain gear and stuff like that. When I pier fished, we always got a longer run on the southeast return. That would start up here in Anglers. It would start around St. Patty's Day with the mackerel, bluefish, and pompano, and it would last into May. Whereas when they'd come down, it would be when the northeaster would blow, and that would be, you know, whatever. But I think the feeling of satisfaction came from harvesting clean meat. I would eat the fish. Mm-hmm. I have taken fish to market before, but those days are long since passed. And now we buy fish at the market.
Right.
Yeah. Never. always fresh, never frozen, piece this big, flying off the shelves.
Hmm.
Now, fortunately, I have friends who do get the fish, and I have the deal with the Parkinson's is the more you try to do and the more you do, the better you get at doing things. And I would recommend, I joined, it didn't cost me, the Parkinson's Foundation and this Michael J. Fox thing. And that poor young fella, pardon me, it's just remarkable that anybody can, he won something at the British Film Festival last year.
Yeah.
But it's, you practice, like I say, I have the straps, I have the dumbbells, I have the pull downs, I have, and believe it or not, boxing, throwing punches and stuff seems to quicken you. So and they tell you stuff like you really shouldn't drink any wine at night and everything else. And like, yeah, right. Yeah, I'll be, yeah, I didn't get the memo.
So you're not listening to all of the.
I didn't listen to, but you got to have a reason to live. There's some mornings, the one feeling that you get, that the crazy feeling is that you feel like your feet stick to the floor. And besides, you're spinning through the universe on the arms of an equilateral triangle or whatever, that's the worst. And it's embarrassing in front of my wife. I always say, she married a boy, I became a man, and now she's stuck with a cripple, and it is what it is.
Yeah. And so how long have you had this? When was it
I'm going to say the first sign of it was, and I thought it was bad arthritis. I would say maybe I'm 77. I would say probably 8 years, because I was still walking on the beach and still dragging my beach cart, and I would run for fitness.
Mm-hmm.
And I was strong in the arms. I mean, I had, there's a cat. I used to lift over at the gym over here, and I was old enough that I used to power lift, and I had some big numbers.
Nice. And so when you're first diagnosed with that, you kind of stopped lifting, or
no. They changed a lot of things around here. You had to reserve time in there. It was hard, very hard walking upstairs, and I would have to walk up an incline to get in there. And of course, you were suffering from a certain loss of muscle,
right,
due to age. But the other thing, so I try to maintain that, what I can do here. And I have dumbbells of 3 sizes. But as far as getting down there, and I mean, I used to be able to do 1-arm push-ups when I was a kid, when I worked at a steel joint and shit. When we were kids, we were all, it was easier. Yeah. Who knew? I just got a notice. Our 60th reunion, Fort Lauderdale High School, class of 1965. There's this one kid I grew up with in elementary school. I remember I punched him in class one time, laid him out. He goes to every reunion. He's just insufferable. Goes to every reunion. But he was there when history was made. And he always asks me, always emails me. He talks about the bridge. We used to get them. And, I want to say, Jim, I never saw you with a fishing rod in your life. And I mean, I don't, I try not to be, I'm trying to give back in a stage in my life. I'm not trying to be as obnoxious as I'm capable of.
Well, you're doing a good job today. You're giving a lot of good advice.
Well, thanks. Well, no, I knew you by reputation. I very much respected you. Okay. Oh, the one story I wanted to tell you, the Lefty Cray story. We talked about how big the permit get, and he told me in the QT here at the house one time he was off Key West out by the Marquesas, and 2 permits swam up to the boat that he said were 100 pounds in deep water.
I kind of believe that. I had a situation on the biggest permit I've ever seen was in the Marquesas, and it was tarpon season, and we're sitting there just, tarpon are just coming down, and they're all 100 pounds, and they're, and you see them all day long. And then this one comes and it just looks slightly different, but it's the same size as everything else that we've seen. And it swam right up to the boat, and it was a permit. And
I had a picture and we couldn't find it. I was talking to my friend I've still stayed in touch with from back in the old Anglin's Pier days. We had an album in there, and there were two guys. They went in the Army, and one guy, well, it was Tommy Engel, he went in the Navy, and Eric Cartwright, and they were, I don't know, 5'8", 5'9". I mean, they weren't real super tall, but they had a permit that they had caught. They snagged at Indian Key, and they were holding the permit up, both of them, one under each, by the gills, and the permit was bent over on the ground.
Wow.
And I mean, I've seen that. Cartwright, yeah.
That's a big one. That's a big.
They used to call me, they were miserable. When you were a kid, you had to go through an apprenticeship. My nickname was Duck because I used to walk like this, and I walk like a duck. It was like Dick. Duck Dempley, and there was another guy they called us Shark Bait.
You still see those people at your reunion?
No, they didn't. They didn't. Well, the Shark Bait drowned. He was a manager for Publix. He drowned in the first day of vacation, skin diving off of Palm Beach.
That's terrible.
In shallow water. He just had an embolism or something like that.
Terrible.
Yeah, I mean, and Duck is still here, Dempley. But Dempley lives in South Miami, and his wife is very talented, and I think he stays around the house. He does yard work. He likes light tackle fishing. He's still very good with it. His latest is very sensitive, these casting reels that you can throw with a 1/4-ounce jig.
Yes.
I have a couple of casting reels. I have a couple of those bluegrass reels over here from back in the 1850s or whatever.
Really?
Yeah, the one of them I have is my wife's maiden name is Talbot, and one of them is a Talbot reel. Kentucky in the war between the states, or war of the Civil War, it kind of split. Half the people went one way, half the people went another. And you needed a job back then. If you lived, it was the area around Frankfurt, I think in Lexington is where they made them, but it was a machine shop. And then they're nickel, silver, and everything. I'd get up and, Vicki, would you, for a second, could you help me out so I don't lose my place in the world? I want to get that Talbot reel and show it here.
Is that right behind you? Or is it
Not, it's one on the other side of the,
this one?
yeah. Here it was.
I'll be downstairs for a second.
Okay, no level wind,
Wow.
no nothing.
No drag.
Little tiny nickel silver. You have to have your glasses on to see it here. But that was bluegrass country. First girl I married was from Kentucky. But, yeah.
Steve, I think we could probably continue to tell stories all day.
Oh man, I'm quite sure.
But unfortunately, we're running out of time.
I listen.
I do want to thank you for coming by.
So much appreciate your courtesy.
Absolutely.
And the way you handle this. I've done one or two podcasts before, and I think this is going to rank among one of my best.
All right. Well, I appreciate you. And if people are interested in your books, they're interested in reading what you've written and following you at this point, where can they find your book?
The best place to reach me is my email, and I'm kind of past this message stuff. Is my email is landcaptain, all small case letters, @Comcast.net. Just think of throwing the net.
Landcaptain@Comcast.net. All right.
.net, right. And I still have some books left over from previous orders, but we're still sending them out. And I'm sure that I'm going to go for the marbles with Manchineel here and the other one. But
right.
We'll see.
Right. Well, good luck with that. And thanks for coming by. I really appreciated hearing your story.
Oh, man. Thanks for inviting me.
You're Very welcome. Very welcome.
Anyway.
People know the land captain. Go check him out. Check out his books. He's written some amazing books and had a great career on the Tamiami Trail. We'll be back with another awesome guest, just like Steve Kantner, next week, and we'll see you then. See ya.